was no evidence that Mr. Noriega was involved in drugs, no hard evidence until we indicted him.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably, but it was for the good of the system.
No, we don't mess around other people's elections, Joe.
Welcome to another episode of the Rackets Podcast. I've got a very special guest here, Toby Muse, who was did an episode of, it was more than a few years back. We discussed this topic, and since then you've written this, I think it's a very well-reviewed book, Kilo. I got to look at the subtitle here, Inside the Cocaine Cartels, From the Jungles to the Streets. Welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be back, and thanks for inviting me on. I always enjoy these chats, so I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Again, there was always just great feedback. As far as your last episode, people, I think, really enjoyed, really what you had to say. And now you've got this finished product. I've read the book myself. I really enjoyed it. A lot to discuss there. One of the things I was kind of hoping that we could start out, discussing was really what brought you to Colombia, because I know your background. You've been in, I would say several. I think you've reported from several different war zones. Right? What brought you to Colombia there?
So I was desperate graduating from university. I was desperate to be a foreign correspondent. And my first place I went to was Buenos Aires, Argentina, which, is a beautiful country, but that was way too calm for me. I was a young man who wanted the adventure. I wanted to get out there. And Colombia at the time was going through one of the world's longest running civil wars, and had been and continues was and continues to be the international center of the cocaine trade. And so to me, as just a young man, I was like, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to be. It's, as I say, it was like this real thing of like, I wanted to, like, I think a lot of foreign correspondents, you want to have a feeling that you're changing the world with your stories, but also a sense of adventure, which can be selfish, so it is these two tensions within you. One is, hey, look, I want to do this, but on the other hand, it's like, I want to have an interesting life. And Colombia is just, there is nowhere on the planet better for a person in their 20s than Colombia. I'm not sure, like, getting older is a great place to be, Colombia. It's very merciless, but the speed of everything in Colombia, and especially the cocaine trade, that moves with an electricity. You can feel a voltage in the air when you're kind of in this world. So that was really what got me to Colombia and got me really investigating and researching and reporting on the cocaine trade. And I think what I really started to appreciate as my journalism career went on, and we can talk about this more if you like, but is that I started off in financial journalism. My first job in Colombia was working for Bloomberg News. And it's a great organization for financial news, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. So then I kind of moved away from that and was able to do more on the Civil War, more on the cocaine trade. But it was also me, as my journalism career has progressed, I've used fewer and fewer statistics because I think that they just don't convey the truth, and readers just, their eyes glaze over. And what I try to do is I want to tell the human stories, because I think that does connect in a way. And so I think what is kind of unique about a lot of my reporting, certainly in English, is that I was able to develop a lot of acquaintances within the Colombian cocaine underworld. Through a sort of series of coincidences and friendships, they led on to other people. And I wanted to tell these human stories. I wanted to move away from the graphs and the pie charts and the statistics, and this has grown by 7%, because I just don't think people don't understand it, quite rightly. I know my eyes glaze over if you throw too many statistics at me. And I think it was a focus. By the time I wrote my book, the study of cocaine had become very academic. Right. And they were constantly talking about you know, social development theories. They would reference old academic works. They would put into the statistics and everything. And I was like, that's not my experience of the cocaine world. My experience of the cocaine world is a 15-year-old boy in a slum, looking down from Medellin, looking on the city and dreaming of a fast car and an actress girlfriend. And you can't put that in an Excel sheet. And I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm genuinely not. The statistics have their role, but we were completely ignoring the role of sex in the cocaine trade. This is one of the prime movers, man. This is what these men wake up and they think. And it's not to be dismissed. But again, you can't get that in an academic paper because they don't know how to quantify it. And I get that. So let them keep doing the statistics. But I was going to tell these human stories of the relationship. So this is why I interviewed the lovers of the drug traffickers. I became friends with one. I felt that was an underappreciated part of this world. And that's what I really wanted to kind of. So, I think in the end, just to sum up this, cocaine really runs on the darkest of passions: lust, treachery, greed. And I wanted to approach the industry through that prism. And a final thing, especially there's been a lot of more coverage of the drugs industry in recent years. I think some people have been quite interesting about viewing the cocaine trade through a business model, for instance. So you'll hear certain things. People will say things like, well, if Chapo Guzman or Pablo Escobar was born in different circumstances, they could have been the CEO of General Motors. And I can't express how much I disagree with that, because I don't think it's true. These men thrive because there's a black market. El Chapo Guzman has the qualities, and Pablo Escobar, to thrive in the black market. They're merciless, they're violent, they never forgive, and they have no problem showing off violence. Those are the qualities you need. And take the example, Pablo Escobar, Chapo Guzman, without the black market, are nobodies. Pablo Escobar is knocking off cemeteries. That's literally what he was doing. He was stealing cars and stealing tombstones. Al Capone, who was he going to be without the black market of prohibition booze? He was going to be standing on a street corner in Chicago, bullying 3 prostitutes or something, and extorting the old grandmother who runs the corner store. He wasn't going anywhere. But once we create the black market, the sky's the limit for these guys. So anyway, that was kind of a lot of what I wanted to get into my book, and just a kind of critique of where we are now. And just to sort of say, I am not a pundit. Smarter people than me can come up with what we're supposed to do to fix this. I wanted to go to the front lines of the war on drugs and report back and say, what we've been doing is not working. I don't know what comes next. Again, that's not my job. I'm a reporter. But I can just say what we're doing right now ain't working. And let's think of a new approach so another generation of young men and women don't get just churned up in this machine of war. Because it's heartbreaking, to meet these people who will know that they're going to die before the age of 25 in the hyper-accelerated world of cocaine.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that you do really well is when it comes across, when you're reading it, I hate there's sort of like the good guy versus bad guy narrative, right? And I feel that you write in a very, I would say, non-judgmental way. You could be writing about, somebody who's a farmer in the field or a merciless killer. And I mean, I'm assuming this is by design, that you're really trying to put yourself in that person's shoes based upon their circumstances, their surroundings. I was kind of hoping you could, maybe expand a little upon, on that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think I do. I think I have a naturally. I consider myself, if anything, my heroes are old style reporters. That they just go there. And in fact, I'm happiest sitting in the corner of a room with a notepad and just watching everybody else interact and getting the little gestures. And, really, as you say, putting yourself in their shoes. By the end of the book, I had to sort of wake myself up a bit. And I was like, Toby, this man is a hired killer. I mean,
Right.
he does kill people for a living. You should be a bit more judgmental. This, okay, you know, and I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, I mean, but but my big problem is the system that creates this problem. I believe we absolutely have handled this thing about as badly as we can. And my real anger I reserve for those people. I think there's something unbelievably cynical about continuing a war that everyone knows is already lost and just going
Right.
through the motions. And that really does stir an anger within me. But it was this blurred line because a lot of these people, in order to get the interview with the hitmen, I did have to become their acquaintance.
Right.
And so, you know, this was also something for me to remember. And certainly going forward as well. I can't say I always did a good job, but, you know, I mean, was I able to separate these two worlds? Was I perhaps a bit too indulgent? Perhaps. Very, very, very possibly. Because it doesn't work that way of, okay, your interview's at 9 a.m. I've agreed to give you this interview, come and, you know, you sit down and you say, okay, let's talk about it. It doesn't work that way. You meet them once and you go out for beers and then you see them again. And then, you know, a sort of an acquaintanceship is emerging. But yeah, I had to keep reminding myself, some of these people are real animals as well, you know. And again, you can sort of get, and Colombians are very charming as well. Don't forget that, you know, the charm of the South American. I compare it. I feel we don't have it, certainly coming out of England. We definitely don't have it. But I think the charm and the social sense that a South American has is as important as the five senses. I genuinely believe that. And we just don't have it. And their ability to relate to other people is incredibly important. So they're charming. And, you know, you get carried away and you have lunch. And then, you know, I ended up partying with a lot of these people as well. So yeah, you know, I mean, as I say, it did weigh on me, that thing, that perhaps, you know, maybe I needed to be a bit more harsh. But then on the other hand, you know, you're also worried about, I can't deny that it goes through your mind, what's going to happen when they read this?
Right.
I mean, you don't hold things back, but there is a security element. You know, if you piss off a drug lord, you know, that now don't, if you're going to let that, if you're going to self-censor yourself, you shouldn't be doing this job.
Right.
It would be ridiculous just to say, oh, I was never concerned about that. I mean, you do the job, you tell the truth. But, you know, hey, like, I mean, you know, luckily for me and unluckily for him, he was murdered before the book came out, you know, but still. But I mean, even then I had to cover up a lot of things about, I had to cover up any indication so people couldn't figure out who he was, because that would then lead to all of his associates coming under the gaze of the authorities, and then there would be revenge. People would come to me for it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like you have any reason. I mean, that's just a natural instinct because you have morals, but at the same time, you're never going to get to the real character of a person if they feel that you're judging them the entire time. So yeah, you're not. You're trying. I think you're coming from a good place of a place of good, genuine curiosity, and I think it comes across.
Oh, well, that's very cool.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I know we discussed it years ago. You might not remember it, but I remember you telling me that you really wanted to land the feel of this story, and I was kind of hoping, you know, we can get a little bit more into the details, but I guess sort of like, what was your motivation? You've been reporting in this country for years. It's a lot of work that goes into writing a book like this. Kind of what was the motivation? You know, what were you hoping to tell?
I mean, the motivation, I think it goes back to this idea of these people's, I wanted to take the reader, again, it goes back to this thing of, I think, I felt that the reporting and the way we discussed cocaine was so detached from my reality. And I wanted to take the reader and say, or the reality I would see when I would go visit these people. And I wanted to take the reader and say, look, I'm going to put you in the middle of the cocaine whirlwind. And I want you to feel what it is. And I came up with this idea of, because there's an electricity in it, and it feels like you're standing in the middle of a casino everyone around you is winning money. There's that electricity of money changing hands. Everybody's sort of pairing off and going into hotel rooms to have sex. And at any moment, someone could step up and put a bullet in the back of your head. That's what cocaine feels like, right? It's just this incredible electric energy that propels it forward. And I just wasn't seeing that at all reported. I was seeing every article in the New York Times or the Washington Post. It would be like, well, the drug czar says this, and this academic says this, and it was just so, and it was so, it didn't have that energy. And then occasionally people would interview these old drug traffickers who were in prison. They're old men, so they don't feel it. They've lost that energy. Then they've got these glorious stories about how when they were doing it's all nonsense, I wanted to kind of get, all right, because always the one thing I've really come to appreciate in life, and especially when you're looking at armed groups, when you're looking at criminal organizations, always keep an eye on the mid-rank guys. These are the ones who can plan it and execute it. The old men get too big, they're too fat, they're too used. They've been living the hog life. These guys can give orders. Oh yeah, go, all right, that's interesting. But the mid-range guys, they can develop a plan of attack and do it. And those are the ones to keep an eye on in every single sort of violent incident. So these are the guys I wanted to be around. I wanted to see them in operation. I wanted to see them in action. And I wanted to report back. And it's like, these guys, there's a certain way of, their being and, a world that exists around them. And it's just, another thing is, the sheer eccentricity of this world, I also thought hadn't been really explored. I think just, how they all have their own personal witches, the witchcraft, for instance, just little things like that. That doesn't come across again in the Excel sheet. It doesn't, right. I wanted to, these little things to go out shopping with their girlfriends. And they go to a shopping center in the center of Medellin, or not the center, but one of the most exclusive. And she's just like taking stuff off, whatever she wants. One of them was telling me that, I can't even remember the figure, but it was something like her shopping was $10,000-$15,000 a month in a third world country where that's a yearly wage. Right. So that's what I wanted to, those were the kind of things I wanted to, and to really put the reader in that place.
Yeah, I think you definitely captured it. And you really point out, again, social intelligence is definitely a thing. There's a value to that. I think in that black market, that's a really valuable skill. One of the things that really stood out to me too was the life of the growers, right? Because we're talking now about the traffickers and that element. One of the things I was hoping you could talk about, because I don't think the average person really understands, I guess maybe kind of paint the picture of, I'm assuming just traveling to these areas where they grow this, is all, pretty damn difficult. And I guess I think you also paint a picture of, I guess, I'm assuming there's probably not a lot of other choices realistically for someone who lives in these areas. But yeah, I was kind of hoping maybe you could paint the picture a little bit there.
Yeah, especially because Colombia is such a touristy destination now, and it's an incredible country, and really I'd highly recommend it. It's beautiful, the people are incredible, it has this incredible history. There's so much to recommend it. And I do think there are these two Colombias. And I think people quite rightly, after they read my book, about, hey, look, can you tell me about security and stuff? To get to where the cocaine is made, you really have to make an effort. You are not going to go on the tourist trail, take one wrong turn, and now you're in the middle of a coca field. It just doesn't happen. These are well known, as they call them, red zones that you really have to make a decision to go to. And I would not advise anyone to do this without really understanding what they're doing, because these zones are controlled by illegal armed groups. Where there's coca, an illegal armed group, be it on the left or be it on the right, is going to be in control of that. And if they're of the left, there's a high chance you could get kidnapped. So all of the times whenever I visited a particular red zone, be it for the violence or be it for the coca or whatever, there was always preparation. You had to have someone who was waiting for you, who they themselves had spoken to the people. They themselves had either explicitly or let someone else know, hey, by the way, you know, I've got a friend coming in. He's a journalist. You've got to be very open about what you're doing, because otherwise they start thinking you're the DEA or the CIA. So, you know, I know one of the women who I worked with who helped me get a lot of access. I know that she had to send word to one of the illegal armed groups. However she did it, I have no idea. But I know she did it, because otherwise I was going to get kidnapped. She was going to get murdered. It's just the way. And they would have, like, even if it's just a nod or they just don't say anything, that's acquiescence. That's a yes, right? So yeah, it's incredibly interesting, this part of the country. They really do live in a level, it really is often the only choice they have, because the country, Colombia has so many resources, but it's an incredibly, it's always suffered from this problem that the landscape is just too much. It's too much, right? I mean, that country is just uncontrollable. You have thick jungles, you have the mountainous ranges. So you've always had this weak central government that has never been able to bring a minimum of civilization to the whole country. And civilization, I mean healthcare, basic law and order, and education. That has been completely beyond the Colombian government for its entire history. So when you get to the zones where coca is grown, the law and order is enforced by the illegal armed group that operates there, that controls the region. And they will, the FARC, for instance, when they, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, at one point Colombia's largest Marxist rebel group, they had a peace process with the government in 2016. They demobilized. Dissident elements continue, but the majority. The FARC, when they controlled towns, there would be rules of behavior, and they would fine you. You know, if you got into a drunken fight, you would be fined $5. You know, if you were, you know, beating your wife, you know, you would be fined $10. I mean, so they would resolve disputes, and it shows that the complete lack of law and order. Then it's also a lack of infrastructure, and that's so I'll give you an example. Where I was and they were growing coca is a place in a region called Tibu. Tibu has it's a municipality, but it's also a village of about 20,000 people. So you get to Tibu, and that's really kind of the end. To get to where the coca was grown, we left Tibu. We spent 3 hours going along this highway that is filled with these craters, because the rebels just blow up stuff whenever they can. So the cars are going, but you know, it's going. That took 3 hours. We got off because the car couldn't go on the dirt track. We had to wait for a bus because the big wheels could handle the potholes of this. Then we got to the bottom of that. Then the bus couldn't go any further. So then we got on a motorbike for an hour. Then we had to cross a river with a makeshift ferry, which was basically just barrels and planks. And we had to cross the motorbike, then another hour on the motorbike. That was 6 hours. No, not why I'm putting up. That was 6 hours. I promise I can count. That was 6 hours. I looked when I got back, and I got back the internet. I looked as the crow flies, 30 kilometers, but it took 6 hours. If you have a ton of pineapple out there, that is impossible. You cannot bring that into market. What you can have is you can produce coca. You can bring it down. You can take a ton, roughly, you know, we're rounding up, a ton of coca leaves, reduce it to something called coca paste, like 1 kilo. That's basically what they're doing. And it's this size.
Oh, wow.
Just throw that in the back of throw that in the back of 2 of these in the backpack. Then you could get to town. That you can commercialize, that you can sell. But you can't do a ton of apples. I mean, you can't do it when there's no roads, there's no bridges. And coca has become the crop of choice, because a lot of them others just won't, they don't return any investment. Now they're now getting up to about a harvest about once every 2 or 3 months. It's kind of impressive. Someone told me that there are harvests coming closer to 8 times a year for coca from a single field, which is just insane. But that's what he was saying. Because Colombia is incredibly fertile, but it has become the basis of these local economies. You can go to towns in Colombia where they accept currency of cocaine. So you go into a store and you buy a little jar of coffee and you just weigh out that you've agreed with the shopkeeper, okay, that will be 15 grams of cocaine. So you weigh out, and then, I mean, it's also, you'll see that in a place like, in gold mining areas, they'll use gold as a currency. And it's just the way capitalism reinvents itself every time to fill a gap. But a final point of just how dependent these people are on cocaine and cocoa, where I stayed for about 2 weeks in this region of cocoa, the local farmers had built a school, and that school took them around 3 years to raise the money. And they raised the money by setting up an informal toll on this dirt track. Anytime any sort of commerce passed by, a guy either bringing, which was always stolen, contraband gasoline from Venezuela. We were literally 15 minutes walk from the border with Venezuela. So they would come one way, or it would be cocaine or coca. They would pay like 50 cents every time they drove past. That's what paid for the school. It took them 3 years. Cocaine paid for that school. Where's the local government? Where's the central government? So they've completely let these communities just completely alone. And of course, they're going to respond. They're going to, try and survive. I will say a final thing, which I think is interesting and hasn't been reported. And it does bring that kind of 20 years I've been interviewing these people. I have never seen the coca farmers as ready to quit the business as they are now. And that's because basically the money is not there the way it was. And you can see that in the parties. I went out partying with these coca farmers on the weekend. 20 years ago, I remember I went to a tiny town called Llorente. These coca farmers would come in, they would sell their coca pays, they would sell 2-3 kilos. Then it was a spectacular party. There would be bottles of whiskey, there would be 2-3 prostitutes over the course of a weekend. They would go to the brothel, then they would go, have a dance, and they would get drunk. They would literally fall asleep at the table at the bar, sort of at 9 a.m. in the morning, kind of wake up, start drinking beer again. They did this all weekend. There would be cockfights, everything. Now, because the illegal organizations are really controlling the market in a way that they haven't done in the past, they're imposing a price. And that price really hasn't risen much over 20 years. So now these farmers come in, there's a little bit, there's no whiskey in. Now it's beers, right? And it's, there's no like your 3-4 lovers in a weekend prostitutes. No, if you're lucky, it's one prostitute. This is it's absolutely part of a tradition. Every time they sell the coca, they will go to a local brothel, which are all over these coca zones. But so they're not earning as much money, but they've got all of the downside of cocaine. And the downside of cocaine is you're living as an outlaw. That everything, you can't go to any sort of legal recourse. You have no legal recourse. If someone threatens your life, you can't go to the police. What are you going to do? Hey, I'm a coca farmer, come to my coca farm and take down my statement about how I was threatened. No, you're in this world now. You may be a farmer, but you're in this world. So there is a tremendous downside, and the violence is what really depresses them. That they understand that living in this world of cocaine, living under the control of an illegal armed group necessarily means violence. And they're tired of it. They want the government to come up with a serious plan to help them get off. But they're very suspicious of the government, as they should be. Because if you trust the Colombian government, there's a chance you're going to get burned.
Yeah, no, you bring up a really good point. Something I've wondered about for quite a while, because I've read reports of, instances where these groups where they're forcing coca, some of the farmers to do that. I wonder how much agency they really have, because like you say, sure, and maybe the government can come in and kill a leader and gain a little bit of control for a while, but I really doubt that they're going to stay there for the long term and really provide true security in these remote areas, because there's just so many, remote areas. There's so much ungoverned land. How realistic is that? And I mean, what are your instincts? Let's say someone really does kind of put their foot down. I'm not growing this anymore. I'm going to grow the pineapples. How soon do those armed groups come in and say, well, you have to go back to doing that. Does that sound crazy to you? Or like, what are your
No,
thoughts?
not at all. And I think it's really good. And I think you're really getting into the rhythm of how all of this actually operates. And you're really on that level, because a lot of people, they just can't get it, but you're filling in the blanks. That is a lot of times what happens. Exactly. The dynamics of the illegal architecture of this whole thing sort of necessitates that, right? The legal group takes a cut of any coca sales, so they are not in the mood of losing that business. So that definitely happens, and I know that happens. But sometimes it is interesting to see, it can be quite a case-by-case basis on which is the illegal group, because there's a really interesting dynamic that they themselves, the illegal group, actually rarely rule in an explicitly malignant, malevolent way. What actually ends up happening, especially with the left-wing groups, is a to and fro between the community and the rebels. So there is a leeway, and that the rebels sometimes have to sort of listen to the community. If the community really feels strongly about something, the rebels will often listen. And they don't act. I think the Hollywood version is, the first person says anything, they're killed with an AK-47. It's much more nuanced than that. And it's actually something I've never seen reported on. And I've had to witness it with my own eyes. But it's a really interesting thing about how the rule, the governed, and the governors, that relationship. It's really interesting. That's not to say there aren't other places in Colombia where you say, hey, by the way, I'm sick of your coca. I'm getting out. You will have a bullet in the back of your head before you even finish that sentence. And one of the reasons why we're actually we haven't touched on this, we're living in the golden age of cocaine right now. There is more cocaine than ever before in history. People tend to think it's Pablo Escobar. Forget about Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar couldn't dream of the world we are in. Colombia might have produced 2,500 tons of cocaine last year. I mean, it's just there's no precedent for the amount of cocaine that's swooshing around this world. One of the reasons was, I go back to that peace deal with the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, 2016. They had been fighting this bitter civil war with the government, and finally, after years of strenuous, onerous negotiations, they came to this thing. And the FARC, political violence is ingrained in Colombia at this point. So the FARC have to be commended for the bravery of this peace deal. They said, we've lived our lives with the gun. We're now going to lower our guns. Our enemies are still out there, not just the soldiers. No, we other illegal armed groups are our enemies. We are lowering our guns. But what that means is, and they begged the government, they said, we now control a lot of the territory where coca is. You have to come in. This is the FARC talking to the government. You have to come in and install that minimum of law and order. Because the FARC knows, and everyone who knows that as long as there's cocaine out there, illegal armed groups will prosper. And what the FARC were terrified would happen is they would lower their weapons. There would be no one looking after this coca. The FARC's enemies would come in. They would take over. They would become stupendously wealthy and then set off an entire new dynamic of violence, which the FARC would also be victims of, but now unarmed. It's exactly what happened. The Colombian government didn't turn up to where it was supposed to impose. At this point, I don't even know if the Colombian government ever will be able to ever control that country. I keep asking for it to do it, and it keeps failing. So maybe it's impossible. Maybe it's just impossible for the Colombian government to control that territory. Ecuador seems to be able to control its territory. I know it's going through a bad time, but a defense minister once told me of Ecuador. He says, and he kind of gave me this example. They share a border, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm going to get the defenseman, retired defense minister. He said, I'm going to give you an example. If you point to some part on the map of Ecuadorian territory, if I'm sitting in my office, within a minute or two, I can tell you, all right, well, in that region, the police commander is this, and, then I can tell you where the local closest police station is. I can tell you who owns that land. I can just, it's under our control. That doesn't mean things aren't going to happen, but it is territory we understand and we control. And he said, if you look over into Colombia, it's just chaos. There's no legal ownership of the land, so there's no deeds. There's entire stretches where there's no police or would be responsible for it. There's entire stretches where the closest police station could be, I don't know, 100 kilometers away. And he says that's the difference. So again, I don't know if Colombia can do it, but it certainly failed in 2016. And I know of farmers who were told specifically by the new groups that came into the zones to take over the FARC's territory, if anyone rips out a single bush of coca, we're going to kill them.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is and now we're just, the rate of cocaine production is just accelerating to such a large extent. I wonder at some point, is there going to be some sort of glut? I think, are the consumers going to fall out of love with cocaine? I don't know. It hasn't happened so far. But cocaine, we know, is pushing into new markets. They're looking at Asia. They're looking at Africa. Because cocaine is not just your own regular drug. Cocaine and capitalism go hand in hand, and they always have done. And that Asian billionaire, you know what's going to really let him show off on a Friday night? Hey, I've got 10 grams of pure cocaine in my pocket.
Oh.
This was like the 80s in New York and London. Cocaine and capitalism, they go hand in hand, always have done.
Yeah, that is, it's a really good point you make. And I know your time's limited. I was hoping maybe one last question.
Sure. Go for it. Go for it.
But yeah, you brought up something really interesting, right? The end of the Civil War there is 2016. And from what I can tell, it looks like about 90-something% of the FARC, they laid down their arms. There were, a certain percentage of them were these dissidents who were like, nope, I'm staying in the crime and the cocaine game. And the way I look at it is because we look at the crime rate, because Ecuador was a pretty low crime rate. And it just looks like by Colombia not managing its security problems, that has drifted over and created this element. It's not like there wasn't crime in Ecuador before, but for the region, it was actually a pretty low crime area. I was kind of curious your thoughts, just on that general topic.
Sure. And I think it's a really good question. And I've got a very specific theory about this. And I've seen it play out time and time and time again. At the beginning with cocaine, there's always, sorry to repeat a phrase, but in a certain different context, but a sort of golden age. And this is at a micro level, at a macro level, however you want to see it. When you go to a village and they've just started growing cocaine, they'll always tell you there was this, or they'll remember their history of their relationship with coca and producing cocaine. Everyone will always tell you, man, you know what? At the beginning, it was just incredible. We would play and we would do stacks of cash. There was parties. Everyone was able to start buying cars. I never had a chance of buying a car in my life, every single time. And then what happens is the hangover kicks in. Ecuador has been a major transit point for years, and they were living the high life. The cocaine was flooding through Ecuador, but what was happening? And I want Europe to really think about this, because I don't think Europe has a clue about what's coming. The money that was going through Ecuador everybody was making money, the illegal groups, the gangs, right? But they were getting stronger and stronger and stronger. There's no need to fight because everyone's getting rich. But at some point, you've recruited so many men, you've got so many weapons, you are so strong, and you just turn around and say, why am I sharing with these guys? Let's go to war. And now everybody is so wealthy and they're so prepared to kill because of the insane profits that you can make from cocaine. A kilo of cocaine in Colombia, I think is between $1,000 or $2,000 if you really get it, in a zone where they know you, in the countryside. If you get that same kilo out to say somewhere like Australia, it's $250,000.
Yeah.
I mean, the money is just, it used to be, I don't know what the prices are now. It used to be around $25,000 for a kilo in Miami. It used to be $40,000 for a kilo in New York City. But $2,000 to $38,000 difference. And that's before it's even been cut. Once you start cutting, and everybody always cuts, right? I don't care what they say. No, I don't. Yeah, they cut. Everybody always cuts, right? So someone's sneakily taking off another 10% there, 20%. So Ecuador was that. It was a time bomb waiting to happen. I've seen it happen in Colombia. You go through this golden age when you just think, hey, why didn't I get into cocaine earlier? This is great. Then the violence always kicks in because there is always someone prepared to kill and die over these stupendous profits. That's what Ecuador's going. These gangs were growing in the shadows, in the peace, and I believe Europe could be heading to something very similar. I've been ringing the alarm bell on this for years, and not years, in the last year or so, and just everyone sort of looks at me like, okay, so maybe I'm just going to be the biggest fool in history, and I don't live in Europe anymore, so I don't have the inside track, but I'm starting to see the things that you are really kind of advanced along the Colombian drug war more than you realize. When we're talking about 15-year-old hitmen in France, that was a story a couple of weeks ago. When you're talking about torture chambers in Rotterdam for the recovery of drug debts, you're far along this. You're further than you realize. What is going to stop these drug gangs in places like Rotterdam when they start shooting down judges?
Right.
What's going to happen when they start crippling the border patrol, the border security? Because remember, sometimes all it needs is just, we're going to pay you 50,000 euros. Something's going to come along, and all you need to do for 1 minute is just,
yep.
That's all you needed to do. You weren't paying attention. How's anyone going to blame you for that? You just missed it. And here's 50,000 euros. I also wonder about the American border as well. I wonder, do we really know the extent of the corruption that is out there? The corruption is not the way they paint it. I remember getting that wrong. A policeman told me the way that the corruption really works. He said, what they do is they'll approach you through friends. And he says, once you start working for them, in fact, they never threaten. He says, because we know, the policeman said, these traffickers know if they really come to us and start threatening us because we worked with them once and said, no, now you need to keep working with it. It doesn't work that way. A, no one else would ever agree to work with them in the future. And B, we would band together and really take them out. You just don't do that. So what I wonder how many people in the border are already, again, they're driving through that Texas entry point. The guy just has to say, oh yeah, this RV, go ahead. That's all he needed to do. $100,000. I think it's already happening. And Colombia and South America really is a lesson. Once the corruption gets in, that's the dragon. That's the dragon that kills everything. I mean, it just destroys everything. Once corruption's in the bloodstream, it destroys social bonds. It makes people cynical. It justifies new levels of corruption. It means crimes are never solved. And it's the thing you absolutely want to avoid at all costs. If you ask Colombians what is the major problem in their country, they won't say the violence. They won't say cocaine. They almost always say it's corruption because it's the source of everything. Because it's just then, yeah. And so I really worry with the amount of money cocaine can just throw around. I really worry about the future of Europe and our institutions here, because once you've rotten out, once these institutions have become rotten from within, it's really difficult, really, really, really difficult to recover them. And I'll give you an example. In the 80s, there was a huge debate in Colombia about using the army against the cocaine cartels or not. And people would openly say, we've lost the police. The army, this is Cold War, right? The army is the backbone of this country. Please do not send the army to fight the cartels. We can't lose them. If everybody who is sent to fight them ends up being contaminated by cocaine. Cocaine has an extraordinary superpower in its ability to corrupt those around her. And, we've seen some cases coming out of the DEA as well, of very strange cases of, one guy was sent to prison, and he said, I mean, this is what our own DEA agents are saying. He said, we all knew that the war on drugs is over and we lost. It's a DEA agent. I mean, yeah, they know better than anyone, right? You know, it's whack-a-mole. We take down one capo, another capo brings up. And it never slows down cocaine by one thing. Well, you know, El Chapo. Did it change anything? Well, someone replaced him.
Yeah, made it worse.
Yeah. And they're warring now. Otoniel was the big trafficker in Colombia. He's now serving decades in a U.S. prison. Nothing changed. No, it didn't slow for 1 second. Cocaine's bigger than any of these people. And cocaine just wants to be trafficked. You know, just keep the thing going. That's all cocaine wants.
I fully agree with you. And yeah, I think that in many ways, you know, these Central and South American countries, they pay for America's war on drugs. And yeah, and I also agree. The corruption's already here in the US. It's been here for years. If you can't keep drugs out of prisons, which it's well documented, there's no way that we can keep it out of a free society. So yeah, I fully agree. God, every time I talk to you, it's always fascinating. So I wish we had more time. Maybe we'll do another episode down the road. I was hoping to maybe take the floor. Is there anything you want to promote or let the people know how they can, you know, follow you? Yeah, just if you would take it away from there.
Yeah, I mean, if this is all of these things I kind of really touch on in my book. So if anyone listening hasn't read my book, Kilo Inside the Cocaine Cartels, I think it's the book I wanted to write. And you know, you have this platonic ideal of what something's going to be, and then the reality is like, oh God, you know. But this was actually the book. I was like, you know, 90% close to what I wanted to read. I hope people enjoy it. You know, it was such a personal book. It's not like any other book I think that they're anticipating. You know, it's not that book. Pablo Escobar was born in 1949. It's not that. That's not the book we're doing here. I'm interviewing unknown drug traffickers because this is where I wanted. I get an email about once a week from people who just, you know, really it connected with them. And, you know, people saying, look, this is the best thing I've ever read on the cocaine trade. And it's really heartwarming. So, yeah, your listeners out there, if they haven't picked it up, that's about the most interesting thing I've got to offer. You know, I mean, my Twitter is just a bunch of mundane observations. Just don't go there for wisdom to my Twitter feed. You're not going to find anything interesting there. Me giving an opinion about Trump or Biden, who cares, you know? But Kilo I think it's an impressive, you know, I'm proud of it. And there's great photos as well. I worked with an award-winning photographer, so yeah, you can really see these scenes we were living.
Oh, I definitely echo that point. And even if you own a copy, go and buy another one, right?
Exactly. A late Christmas
support
present.
a real independent author.
Yeah, and Valentine's coming up, and everybody
exactly.
loves cocaine for Valentine's.
Well, cool. Again, I appreciate your time. And until next time, this is the Rackets Podcast. And thanks again, Toby.
Always a pleasure.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
I am concerned that the size of some of these institutions becomes so large that it does become difficult for us to prosecute.
You can have a license. Price is $250,000, plus a monthly payment of 5% of the gross, of all 4 hotels in the store. Corleone.